Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold window of the UES horizon and stared at something that should not exist. The ship floating in the darkness ahead was massive beyond anything he had ever seen. It stretched across space. Like a metal mountain, its black hull drinking in the light from nearby stars and giving nothing back. "How big is that thing?" he asked his science officer. Dr. Lisa Parker looked up from her computer screen, her face pale. "Almost 10 kilometers long, sir. That makes it larger than some of our space stations back on Earth." Jake had been exploring space for 15 years. He had seen alien ruins, dead worlds, and ships from races that died out millions of years ago. But this was different. This ship felt alive somehow, even though their sensors said it had been floating here for thousands of years. "Any idea who built it?" Jake asked. "No, sir. The metal is nothing like anything in our databases. Our scanners can barely get a reading on it. It's like the ship is absorbing our sensor beams." Chief Engineer Bobby Clark looked up from his station. "Captain, that ship still has power. Faint, but it's there. After all this time, something is still running inside that thing." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. 3 other alien expeditions had tried to board this ship over the past 50 years. None of them had returned. The ship's automated defenses had destroyed them all before they could get close. That's why the Galactic Council had marked this sector as forbidden space. But humans were new to the galaxy. They didn't follow the old rules yet. "Prep a boarding shuttle," Jake ordered. "I want to see what's inside that thing." Security Officer Nina Cross stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, that's probably not a good idea. Every species that's tried to board that ship has been vaporized." "Maybe," Jake said, still staring at the massive vessel. "But maybe they weren't the right species." 2 hours later, Jake sat in the pilot seat of a small shuttle with 3 other crew members. Dr. Parker sat behind him, her equipment humming as it tried to scan the alien ship. Bobby Clark checked and rechecked their shuttle's systems, his hands shaking slightly. Nina Cross held her weapon ready, though they all knew it would be useless against whatever had destroyed those other ships. As they flew closer to the alien vessel, Jake expected alarms to sound. He expected weapons to appear from hidden ports in the ship's hull. He expected to die in a flash of energy like the crews who had tried this before. Nothing happened. The ship's hull grew larger and larger until it filled their entire view. Up close, Jake could see that the black metal wasn't smooth. Strange patterns covered every surface, like writing in a language that hurt to look at. The patterns seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "There," Lisa said, pointing at a section of the hull. "That looks like a docking bay." Jake steered toward the opening. As they approached, massive doors began to slide open with no sound in the vacuum of space. Lights came on inside the bay, revealing a space large enough to hold a dozen shuttles their size. "It's welcoming us," Bobby whispered, "like it wants us to come aboard." Jake landed the shuttle in the center of the bay. The moment their landing gear touched the deck, he heard a sound that made his bones vibrate. It was like music, but not any music made by human voices or instruments. The bay doors closed behind them, and Jake watched his instruments as atmosphere filled the space around their shuttle. "The air is breathable," Lisa reported, checking her readings twice to be sure. "Same oxygen mix as Earth." They put on their spacesuits anyway and stepped out of the shuttle. The docking bay was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Corridors led away from the bay in several directions, each one lit by soft lights that seemed to know where the humans were walking. Jake chose the largest corridor and led his team deeper into the ship. The walls were covered with the same strange patterns he had seen on the hull. As they walked, the patterns began to glow softly, like they were reacting to the humans' presence. "Captain," Nina said, her voice tight with tension, "I don't like this. It feels like we're being watched." Jake felt it too. Not watched by cameras or sensors, but watched by something alive. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. They walked for 20 minutes through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The ship was so large that Jake began to wonder if they would ever find its center. Then the corridor opened into a vast chamber that took his breath away. The room was circular and hundreds of meters across. The ceiling curved high above them, covered with lights that looked like stars. But it was the center of the room that made Jake stop walking. 5 chairs sat on a raised platform in the middle of the chamber. They were clearly designed for beings. Shaped like humans, with armrests and back supports in exactly the right places. Control panels surrounded each chair, covered with symbols that seemed familiar, even though Jake had never seen them before. "This is the bridge," Lisa said in wonder. "It has to be." "But Jake, look at those chairs." Jake was already looking. The chairs weren't built for the tall, thin aliens that dominated the Galactic Council. They weren't made for the short, wide creatures that ran the mining guilds. They were made for humans. "How is that possible?" Bobby asked. "This ship is older than human civilization." Jake walked slowly toward the central chair. With each step, more lights came on around the room. Screens appeared in the air above the control panels, showing images of stars and planets that Jake didn't recognize. The symbols on the panels began to shift and change, becoming clearer. When Jake was 3 steps away from the chair, a voice spoke. It didn't come from speakers or communication devices. The voice seemed to come from inside Jake's head, speaking words in a language he had never heard, but somehow understood perfectly. "Genetic markers confirmed," the voice said. "Neural patterns analyzed. Species identification. Human. Status. Approved for command authority." Jake's team stopped moving. Nina raised her weapon, though she had no target to aim at. Bobby grabbed Lisa's arm, ready to run. But Jake kept walking toward the chair. "Previous species tested," the voice continued. 1,247. "Previous species approved. 0. Jake reached the chair and put his hand on its armrest. The moment his skin touched the alien material, the entire ship came alive. Lights raced along the walls like lightning. The air filled with a sound like singing, but deeper than any human voice could reach. Every screen in the room lit up with information that Jake somehow knew was important, even though he couldn't read the symbols yet. "Welcome, inheritors," the voice said, and now Jake could hear emotion in it. Relief, joy, hope. "I am the ship you call by scanning designation. My true name translates closest to your word, Nemesis. I have waited 50,000 years for your species to find me." Lisa stepped forward, her scientific training overcoming her fear. "You've been waiting for humans specifically? But why?" "Because," the ship replied, and Jake felt its attention focus on him as he lowered himself into the command chair. "Your species possesses the one quality that all others lack. When faced with impossible odds, when all hope seems lost, humans do not surrender. You fight. You adapt. You find a way to win." The chair molded itself to Jake's body, and suddenly his mind was connected to every system on the ship. He could feel the massive engines, dormant but ready. He could sense weapons that could destroy planets, shields that could stop stars from burning. The ship's knowledge flowed into his mind, showing him its history and its purpose. "The builders of this ship knew they would fall," Nemesis explained. "They saw their end coming and prepared for it. They seeded your world with the genetic patterns that would eventually create humanity. They built me to wait for you, to serve you, to help you face what is coming." "What's coming?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer would terrify him. "The Devourer's return," Nemesis said simply. "The enemy that destroyed my builders grows strong again in the dark between galaxies. Soon they will come to consume this galaxy as they consumed the last. Every other species will surrender or die quickly. But humans will fight, and with my help, humans might win. Jake looked at his crew, seeing his own mixture of fear and excitement reflected in their faces. They had come looking for ancient technology and found something far more important. They had found humanity's destiny waiting in the dark, patient as death and twice as dangerous. "Show me," Jake said to the ship. "Show me everything." Jake felt the ship's knowledge flow into his mind like water filling an empty cup. Images flashed before his eyes faster than he could process them. Star maps showing routes through space that no human had ever seen. Weapon systems that could crack moons in half. Engine designs that made human technology look like stone tools. "Easy," the ship's voice said gently. "Your mind needs time to adjust. I have waited 50,000 years. I can wait a few more minutes." The flow of information slowed to a manageable pace. Jake opened his eyes and found his crew staring at him with worry. He had been sitting motionless in the command chair for several minutes, while his brain tried to understand what the ship was showing him. "I'm okay," he said, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "It's just a lot to take in." Dr. Lisa Parker moved closer to his chair, her scanner beeping as it tried to read the energy flowing between Jake and the ship's systems. "Your brain activity is off the charts," she said. "What's happening to you?" "I'm learning," Jake replied. He could feel the ship's vast computer systems like extensions of his own mind. With a thought, he could access any piece of information stored in its memory banks. "Nemesis, show them what you showed me about the builders." The air above the control panels shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at a holographic display of a solar system. But this wasn't like any system in their star charts. The planets were perfect spheres arranged in mathematical precision around a star that burned too evenly to be natural. "The builders created this system 5 million years ago," Nemesis explained. "They had learned to reshape matter and energy as easily as you reshape clay. They could build worlds, create stars, and travel between galaxies in the time it takes. Light to cross a room." Bobby Clark nearly fell over as he stared at the display. They could build planets? They built thousands of them. Entire star systems designed for different purposes. Some for research, some for art, some simply because they thought the arrangement would be beautiful. The hologram changed, showing creatures that looked almost human, but were taller and thinner. Their eyes held an intelligence that seemed to burn like small suns. They moved through cities of crystal and metal that floated in the air above seas. Of liquid light, they were peaceful, Nemesis continued. For 2 million years, they created wonders and explored the universe. They thought they had left war and violence behind them. They were wrong. The peaceful scene dissolved into chaos. The crystal cities cracked and fell. The floating platforms crashed into the seas below. The builders' perfect worlds burned as dark shapes moved between the stars, consuming everything they touched. "The devourers came from the space between galaxies," Nemesis said. "They are not alive in any way you would understand. They are hunger given form, darkness that feeds on light, emptiness that consumes everything it touches. The builders fought, them for 1,000 years and lost." Nina Cross gripped her weapon tighter as she watched the holographic battle. "How do you fight something like that?" "You don't," Jake said, the ship's memories mixing with his own thoughts. "The builders tried everything. Energy weapons just fed the devourers and made them stronger. Physical weapons passed right through them. Even their reality-shaping technology couldn't touch the devourers directly. But they found another way," Nemesis added. The hologram showed the builders working frantically in vast laboratories. They could not win the war, but they could prepare for the next one. They sent ships to young galaxies like this one, searching for species that might succeed where they had failed. Lisa stepped closer to Jake's chair. "What made them think humans could do better than they did?" Jake felt the answer rise from the ship's memory banks. Because we're not like them. The builders had grown beyond violence. They had forgotten how to fight dirty, how to take risks, how to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. They were too civilized to beat an enemy that had no civilization at all. The builders studied thousands of species, Nemesis continued. They found many that were intelligent, many that were strong, many that were advanced. But they found only one species that never gave up, no matter how bad things got. Bobby looked around the bridge with new understanding. U.S., they were looking. For us. They seeded your world with genetic markers 200,000 years ago, Nemesis confirmed. They guided your evolution in small ways, making sure you would develop the traits they needed. Not making you smarter or stronger, but making sure you would never stop fighting. Jake could feel the ship's weapon systems responding to his thoughts. Massive energy cannons emerged from hidden ports along the hull. Shield generators that could bend space and time hummed to life. The ship's engines, dormant for millennia, began to warm up with power that could move mountains. My God, Lisa whispered, reading the energy output on her instruments. This ship could destroy our entire fleet without even trying. I could destroy your entire planet, Nemesis said matter-of-factly. But I was not built for destruction. I was built to preserve life, to protect the innocent, to give the galaxy a chance to survive what is coming. Jake stood up from the command chair, but he could still feel the ship's systems responding to his thoughts. It was like having a new sense, one that let him perceive the entire vessel as if it were part of his own body. When are they coming? He asked. The Devourers? Soon, Nemesis replied. My long-range sensors detect the first signs. Stars going dark at the edge of the galaxy. Entire systems falling silent. The Devourers have awakened from their long sleep and begun to feed again. Nina moved to one of the other chairs and cautiously sat down. Immediately, the ship's security systems opened themselves to her mind. She could see every corridor, every room, every system on the massive vessel. More importantly, she could see the weapons. There are enough guns on this ship to fight a war, she said in amazement. There are enough guns on this ship to win. War, Nemesis corrected, but only if used by the right species. Every weapon system is designed to work with human neural patterns. Your instincts, your reflexes, your ability to think in ways that surprise your enemies. Bobby took another chair and found himself connected to engineering systems beyond his wildest dreams. Engines that could fold space around the ship. Manufacturing. Bays that could build entire fleets. Power sources that drew energy from the fabric of reality itself. This is impossible, he said, his hands moving over controls that felt familiar despite being completely alien. No species could build technology this advanced. The builders had 5 million years to perfect their science, Nemesis replied. But they built me in their final century, when desperation forced them to think in ways they had never considered. I am not just their greatest achievement. I am their final hope. Lisa was the last to sit down, and when she did, the ship's vast database opened to her. The accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization flowed through her mind. Science beyond human understanding. Art that made her weep with its beauty. Philosophy that answered questions humanity had asked for thousands of years. The builders weren't just advanced, she said, tears streaming down her face. They were everything we hoped to become. Wise, peaceful, creative. And they lost. They lost because they were wise and peaceful, Jake said. The Devourers don't understand mercy or negotiation. They understand only hunger. To beat them, you need someone willing to be as ruthless as they are. Humans, Nina said. Humans, Nemesis agreed. Your species has survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed others. You fight when you should surrender. You hope when you should despair. You find ways to win battles that cannot be won. Jake walked to the center of the bridge and looked up at the star field displayed on the ceiling. Somewhere out there, an ancient enemy was moving toward their galaxy. Entire civilizations would fall before it reached Earth. But maybe, with this ship and the right crew, humanity could give the galaxy a chance. Can you make more ships like yourself? He asked. I can build a fleet, Nemesis replied. Smaller vessels designed for human crews. Each one carrying weapons and technology that will make them superior to anything else in this galaxy. But I will need time, and I will need more humans. Jake nodded. Then we'd better get started. Nina, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we've found something they need to see. Bobby, I want you to learn everything you can about this ship's systems. Lisa, start going through their database. Look for anything that might help us understand what we're up against. As his crew began their work, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. 50,000 years ago, a dying civilization had built this ship and filled it with hope. They had gambled everything on the belief that somewhere in the universe there was a species crazy enough to fight an unwinnable war. Now it was time to find out if they had been right. 3 days had passed since Jake and his crew had awakened the Nemesis. The ship hummed with activity as its ancient systems came back to life after 50,000 years of waiting. Jake stood on the bridge, watching as holographic displays showed him the status of repairs happening throughout the massive vessel. Captain, Nina called from her security station. I'm picking up multiple contacts approaching our position, big ones. Jake moved to the main display screen. 12 ships appeared on the scanner, their hulls bristling with weapons. He recognized the design immediately and felt his stomach drop. Vorgani battle cruisers, he said quietly. Lisa looked up from her research station. The Vorgani Empire? What are they doing here? Jake knew exactly what they were doing here. The Vorgani were the galaxy's military superpower, a race of warriors who had conquered dozens of species over the past 1,000 years. Their ships were fast, heavily armed, and crewed by soldiers who had been bred for combat. If they had come to claim the Nemesis, Jake's small crew wouldn't be able to stop them. Incoming transmission, Nina reported. The main screen flickered and showed the bridge of the lead Vorgani ship. Admiral Kraft stood in the center of the image, his scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. The Vorgani admiral was over 7 feet tall, with gray skin and red eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light of his bridge. Primitive humans, Kraft said, his voice filled with contempt. You will surrender the artifact ship immediately. Your species lacks the intelligence to comprehend such technology. We will take possession of the vessel for study by our scientists. Jake looked around his bridge. Bobby was at the engineering station, his hands flying over controls that were still mostly alien to him. Lisa sat surrounded by holographic displays, showing information about the builders and their long war with the Devourers. Nina gripped her weapons console, ready for a fight she knew they couldn't win. The Vorgani had destroyed entire human colonies during the early contact wars. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth could build, and their military had never been defeated in battle. 12 of their battle cruisers could reduce a planet to ash in minutes. Admiral Croft, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. This ship was abandoned in neutral space. Under galactic salvage law, it belongs to whoever found it first. Kraft's laugh was like the sound of metal scraping against stone. Salvage law? You speak of law to the Vorgani? We take what we want, human. We have taken it for 1,000 years. Today, we take your ship. The transmission ended, and Jake watched as the Vorgani fleet moved into attack formation around the Nemesis. Their weapons powered up, energy readings spiking across his displays. In 60 seconds, They would open fire with enough firepower to vaporize a moon. "Jake," Bobby said from his station, "the ship's asking if we want to activate defensive systems." Jake closed his eyes and felt the nemesis respond to his thoughts. The ship's vast arsenal was ready. Weapons that could shatter planets waited for his command. But using them would mean killing thousands of Vorgani soldiers. And Jake wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of responsibility. "There has to be another way," he said. "There is," the ship's voice said inside his mind. "I can disable their vessels without harming their crews. But they must understand that their aggression will not be tolerated." Jake opened his eyes and looked at his crew. "Nemesis says it can stop them without killing anyone. Should we trust it? Do we have a choice?" Nina asked, watching as the Vorgani ships moved closer. "Nemesis," Jake said aloud, "show them why you've been waiting for humanity." The ancient ship's systems engaged without any visible sign of activity. There were no flashing lights, no energy beams, no explosions. One moment the Vorgani fleet was moving into attack position, weapons ready to fire. The next moment, all 12 ships simply stopped. Not stopped moving. Stopped everything. Jake watched in amazement as the Vorgani battle cruisers hung motionless in space. Their engines had shut down. Their weapons had powered off. Even their running lights had gone dark. The ships drifted like dead hulks, though. Jake could see life signs still aboard them. "What did you do to them?" Lisa asked, staring at her instruments in disbelief. "Temporal displacement field," Nemesis replied calmly. "The enemy vessels are now experiencing time at a greatly reduced rate. From their perspective, the next few minutes will seem like several weeks of complete system failure." Bobby leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "You slowed down time around their ships?" "I created a localized distortion in space-time that affects only their vessels. Their crews are unharmed, but they will experience what appears to be a catastrophic breakdown of all their systems. They will attempt to repair the failures, abandon ship, and contact their fleet command. All of their efforts will fail because from their perspective, the outside universe is moving far too fast to interact with." Jake watched the scanner as tiny dots appeared around the Vorgani ships. Escape pods were launching, but they moved so slowly they seemed to be standing still. "They're trying to evacuate," Nina reported, "but their escape pods are barely moving." "Their perception of time has been altered," Nemesis explained. "What seems like hours to them is only seconds to us. They will have time to think about their situation and perhaps reconsider their aggressive approach." For 10 minutes, Jake and his crew watched as the Vorgani fleet experienced what must have seemed like the worst military disaster in their history. Their mighty warships had been rendered helpless by an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Their escape pods drifted uselessly in space. Their communications couldn't reach anyone because the signals moved too slowly to be detected. "That's enough," Jake said finally. "Release them." The effect ended as suddenly as it had begun. The Vorgani ships suddenly returned to normal time, their crews scrambling to understand what had happened. Emergency lights flashed on their bridges as damage control teams tried to figure out why their ships had failed so completely. Admiral Croft's face appeared on the screen again, but this time his expression was very different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by confusion and fear. "What did you do to us?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We showed you what happens when you threaten us," Jake replied. "Your ships are undamaged, your crews are unharmed. But you now know that we could have destroyed you completely if we had chosen to." Krath's red eyes narrowed as he studied Jake's face. "No human ship has technology like that." "What are you?" "We're the crew of the ship you wanted to steal," Jake said simply. "The ship that has been waiting 50,000 years for the right species to claim it. The ship that chose us." The Vorgani admiral was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to process what had happened to his fleet. The Vorgani had built their empire on superior firepower and military tactics. They had never encountered an enemy that could neutralize their entire fleet without firing a shot. "The Council will hear of this," Kraft said finally. "They will not allow humans to possess such power." "The Council can try to take it from us," Jake replied. "But they should ask themselves if they're prepared for the consequences." The transmission ended again, and Jake watched as the Volgani fleet slowly withdrew to a safe distance. They didn't leave the system, but they made no further aggressive moves. The message had been received and understood. "Jake," Lisa said quietly, "what we just did is going to change everything. When word gets out that humans have a ship like this, every major power in the galaxy is going to want it. Or want to destroy it," Nina added. "The Vorgani aren't going to forget what happened here." Jake nodded. He had known this moment would come eventually. The moment when humanity would have to prove they deserved the power the builders had left them. But he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "Nemesis," he said. "How long before news of this incident reaches the Galactic Council?" "Approximately 6 days, assuming the Vorgani send a courier ship to their nearest base," the ship replied. "However, I am detecting subspace communications from their fleet. Word of this encounter is already spreading." Bobby looked up from his engineering console. "What do we do now?" "Every military force in the galaxy is going to want to test themselves against us." Jake walked to the center of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, an ancient enemy was stirring. The Devourers were coming, and when they arrived, every species in the galaxy would need to work together to survive. But first, humanity would have to prove they were worthy of leading that fight. "We go to Earth," Jake said finally. "We need to prepare our people for what's coming. And we need to build more ships like this one." "The manufacturing bays are already beginning production," Nemesis reported. "But each vessel will require a human crew trained to interface with builder technology. That will take time." "Then we'd better get started," Jake said. "Because ready or not, this galaxy is about to discover what humans can do when they have the right tools for the job." Word traveled fast across the galaxy. Within a week, every major government knew that humanity had discovered something extraordinary in the Forbidden Sector. The story grew with each telling until some versions claimed that humans had built the massive ship themselves, while others said they had stolen it from the builders' ghosts. Jake stood on the bridge of the Nemesis as it approached Earth's solar system. The blue and white marble of his homeworld grew larger on the main screen, but he barely noticed it. His attention was focused on the dozens of ships surrounding Earth, all of them broadcasting urgent messages demanding to speak with him. "Looks like we have visitors," Nina said from her security station. "I count ships from the Galactic Council, the Trade Federation, the Science Collective, and at least 6 independent governments." "Any of them hostile?" Jake asked. "Not yet. But there are enough weapons out there to glass a continent." Captain Susan Blake arrived 3 hours later aboard the heavy cruiser UEC Defiant, Earth's most advanced warship. Jake had served under Blake during the colony wars, and he trusted her judgment more than any other officer in the fleet. But even she seemed nervous as she stepped aboard the Nemesis. "My God, Jake," she said, staring around the vast bridge. "The reports didn't do it justice. This thing is bigger than our space stations." "It's bigger than most of our cities," Jake replied. "And it's not just the size. The technology on this ship is millions of years ahead of anything we've ever seen." Blake nodded, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. "That's what concerns Earth Command. They're scared, Jake. Scared of what this ship can do, and scared of what the rest of the galaxy might do to get it." Over the next few days, more humans arrived to see the Nemesis for themselves. Scientists, engineers, military officers, and government officials all toured the massive vessel. But it was the reaction of the ship itself that surprised Jake the most. With each new human who came aboard, the Nemesis seemed to grow stronger. Systems that had been damaged by 50,000 years of waiting began to repair themselves. Manufacturing bays that had been silent since the builders' time roared to life, beginning production on smaller vessels designed for human crews. Dr. Carl Jung, Earth's top expert on alien technology, spent hours studying the ship's computer. "Systems, it's learning from us," he reported to Jake. "Every time a human interfaces with the ship's systems, it incorporates their knowledge and experience. It's becoming more human with each interaction." Jake felt it too. The ship's artificial intelligence was changing, developing personality traits that reflected its human crew. It had begun making jokes, showing curiosity about human culture, and even expressing preferences about which systems it enjoyed operating most. But it was the discovery in the ship's deepest levels that changed everything. Lisa found them while exploring the manufacturing sections, hidden behind layers of security that only responded to human genetic markers, were construction bays designed to build entire fleets. Not just copies of the Nemesis, but hundreds of different ship designs, each one tailored for specific roles in space combat. Fighters, bombers, escort ships, carriers, she reported to Jake as they stood before the massive construction facilities. The builders designed an entire military doctrine around human tactics and psychology. Jake watched as the first of the new ships took shape in the construction bay. It was sleek and deadly looking, with weapon ports along its hull and engines that promised incredible speed. But what struck him most was how human it looked. The curves of its hull, the placement of its weapons, even the way its bridge was designed, all reflected human preferences and fighting styles. "How many can it build?" he asked. "The ship estimates it can produce 50 vessels per month once all bays are operational," Lisa replied. "But each one will need a human crew trained to use builder technology." That was when Jake realized the true scope of what the builders had given them. This wasn't just one ship. It was the foundation of a fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy. But with power came responsibility, and Jake felt the weight of that responsibility growing heavier each day. The first sign of real trouble came from the edge of the galaxy. Long-range sensors aboard the Nemesis detected something that made Jake's blood run cold. Entire star systems were going dark, their light simply vanishing from the universe as if they had never existed. "Nemesis," Jake said, standing before the main display screen as it showed the affected regions. "Is this what I think it is?" "Yes," the ship replied, its voice heavy with ancient grief. "The Devourers have awakened. They are feeding again." The holographic display zoomed in on the affected area, showing star charts where whole systems had simply been erased. Not destroyed, not conquered, but consumed so completely that no trace of them remained. "How fast are they moving?" Jake asked. "At their current rate of consumption, they will reach the galaxy's core worlds in approximately 18 months, Nemesis calculated. However, their advance will accelerate as they absorb more energy from the systems they consume." Captain Blake, who had been studying the tactical displays, looked up with a pale face. "Jake, there are billions of people in those systems. Entire civilizations." Jake corrected grimly. "There were billions of people. The Devourers don't leave survivors." The news reached the Galactic Council within days. Emergency sessions were called as representatives from hundreds of species tried to comprehend the scope of the threat facing them. Some demanded that all available military forces be sent to stop the Devourers. Others argued for immediate evacuation of the threatened sectors. But Jake knew that neither approach would work. The builders had tried everything, and they had failed. Military force just fed the Devourers and made them stronger. Running away only delayed the inevitable. There has to be another way, he said during a conference call with Earth's leadership. The Builders lost because they fought the Devourers on their terms. We need to change the rules of the game. What do you mean? Admiral Chun asked from Earth Command. Jake looked around the bridge of the Nemesis at the crew that had become like family to him over the past weeks. The Builders were too civilized to win this war. They had rules, honor codes, moral limitations. The Devourers don't have any of those things. You're talking about fighting dirty, Blake said. I'm talking about fighting to win, Jake replied. The Devourers expect their enemies to act like the Builders did. Predictable, honorable, limited by their own conscience. But humans aren't. Builders. Nina looked up from her security station. We're survivors. We adapt. We do whatever it takes. Exactly, Jake said. The Builders chose us because we're willing to cross lines that other species won't cross. Because when everything is at stake, humans don't play fair. Over the following weeks, as news of the Devourer threat spread throughout the galaxy, Jake watched the reaction of different species. The Vorgani mobilized their fleets for a glorious last battle. The peaceful Zephyrians began mass evacuations to safer sectors. The technological synthetics calculated the probability of victory, and found it to be 0. But humans did something different. They got angry. Reports came in from human colonies throughout the galaxy. Volunteer fleets were being assembled. Civilian ships were being converted into warships. Human engineers were working around the clock to build weapons based on specifications provided by the Nemesis. They're not running, Lisa observed as she read the reports. Every other species is either fleeing or preparing to die heroically. But humans are preparing to fight. Jake nodded. It was exactly what he had expected from his species. When faced with an impossible enemy, humans didn't calculate odds or consider retreat. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work. The Galactic Council sent a formal delegation to meet with Jake aboard the Nemesis. Representatives from dozens of species filled the ship's main conference room, their faces showing mixtures of hope and desperation. We have come to ask for your help, said Counselor Vex, a tall, thin alien with silver skin and large black eyes. Your ship is the only weapon that has ever successfully resisted the Devourers. Jake looked around the room at the assembled delegates. These were the leaders of civilizations that spanned thousands of worlds. They commanded fleets that could reduce planets to dust. But they had come to ask for help from a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. What exactly are you asking of us? Jake said. Lead the defense, Vex replied simply. Unite the galaxy's forces under human command. Show us how to fight an enemy that cannot be defeated by conventional means. Jake felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. The Builders had made their choice 50,000 years ago when they selected humanity as their inheritors. Now it was time to find out if they had chosen wisely. We'll do it, he said finally. But we do it our way. No rules, no honor codes, no limits. We fight the way humans fight. And how is that? Vex asked. Jake smiled, and for the first time. Since the Devourers had been detected, he felt genuinely confident. We fight to win. 6 months later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Nemesis and watched the largest fleet in galactic history assemble around him. Ships from every major species floated in perfect formation, their hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. Vorgani battlecruisers bristled with weapons. Zephyrian science vessels hummed with advanced sensors. Synthetic computational ships calculated battle strategies at impossible speeds, but it was the human ships that caught Jake's attention. The Nemesis had built them over the past months, each one crewed by volunteers who had trained to interface with builder technology. The U's Vengeance hung off the starboard bow its sleek hull designed for hit-and-run attacks. The UES Liberty maintained position to port, its massive gun batteries ready to provide covering fire. "Final count, Admiral," reported communications. Officer Amy Stone from her station. 3,412 ships from 47 different species. The largest military force ever assembled. Jake nodded, but his mind was focused on what lay ahead. The Devourers had consumed half the galaxy's outer rim, leaving behind empty space where billions of people had once lived. Refugee fleets crowded the inner systems while military leaders argued about tactics that had already failed a dozen times. The Devourers were coming, and conventional weapons couldn't stop them. "Admiral," came a voice from the tactical station. "Lieutenant Commander." Eric Hayes had replaced Nina when she transferred to command her own ship. Enemy contacts detected at the edge of sensor range. "They're big." Jake moved to the main display screen and felt his breath catch in his throat. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a living darkness. There were thousands of them, each one the size of a small moon. They moved through space without engines, propelled by forces that human science couldn't understand. But it wasn't their size that frightened Jake. It was their hunger. Even at this distance, he could feel them, reaching out with tendrils of dark energy, searching for life to consume. They fed on everything, the energy from stars, the life force of living beings, even the basic matter that made up planets and asteroids. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake broadcast to the assembled fleet. "Today we face an enemy that has destroyed civilizations across multiple galaxies. They have never been defeated. They have never been stopped. They expect us to fight them the same way everyone else has fought them." He paused, looking around the bridge at his crew. Bobby Clark manned the engineering station, his hands steady on controls that could reshape reality. Lisa Parker monitored the ship's vast database, ready to provide information about Devourer weaknesses. Amy Stone maintained communications with the scattered fleet, keeping thousands of ships coordinated. "They're wrong," Jake continued. "We're going to show them something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten humanity's home." The Devourer Vanguard reached weapons range first. Dark energy beams lanced out from their biomechanical ships, striking the Allied fleet with power that should have vaporized anything it touched. But the human ships didn't disappear. Their builder-enhanced shields held against the assault, converting the attacking energy into power for their own weapons. "Now they know we're different," Jake said. "All human ships, implement Strategy Alpha. Show them how we fight." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Instead of meeting the Devourers head-on in a traditional battle line, the human ships scattered like startled birds. They moved in unpredictable patterns, attacking from unexpected angles, using tactics that no civilized species would consider honorable. The UES Vengeance dove straight into the heart of the Devourer formation, its weapons firing in all directions. As it spun through space like a wounded fighter, the Devourers tried to drain its energy, but the ship's systems had been designed to overload their feeding mechanisms. Instead of being consumed, the Vengeance's reactor created a feedback loop that destroyed 3 Devourer ships before it escaped. The UES Liberty took a different approach. It hid behind the wreckage of destroyed ships, using the debris as camouflage, while its long-range guns picked off Devourer vessels one by one. When the Devourers finally located it, the Liberty had already destroyed a dozen of their ships and moved to a new hiding spot all across the battlefield. Human ships fought with a creativity that confused and frustrated their ancient enemy. They used the Devourer's own hunger against them, creating energy traps that overloaded their feeding organs. They attacked in waves that seemed random, but followed patterns, based on human psychology rather than military doctrine. But it was Jake, and the nemesis that turned the tide of battle. The ancient ship moved through the Devourer fleet like a force of nature, its weapons carving paths of destruction through enemy formations. But Jake wasn't just trying to destroy the Devourers. He was studying them, learning how they moved and fought and fed. Nemesis, he said, his mind linked to the ship's vast intelligence. Can you create a resonance cascade in their feeding matrix? Theoretical. Possibility confirmed, the ship replied. However, the energy requirements would drain my power core to critical levels. Jake smiled grimly. Do it. The nemesis began to change. Its hull reconfigured itself, creating massive energy collectors that drew power from every source available. Solar radiation, cosmic background energy, even the life force emanating from the billions of crew members in the Allied fleet. Everything fed into the ship's growing power matrix. The Devourers sensed what was happening and turned their full attention to the nemesis. Hundreds of their ships converged on Jake's position, their dark energy beams creating a web of destruction that should have overwhelmed any defense. But the nemesis wasn't defending. It was feeding. Every attack the Devourers made just added more energy to the ship's growing matrix. The ancient vessel absorbed their dark energy beams, converted their feeding tendrils into power, and used their own hunger to fuel its weapons. Ships, pull back, Jake ordered. Get clear of the nemesis. Maximum distance. The Allied fleet retreated as the ancient ship began to glow with accumulated energy. Its hull blazed like a small star as power levels climbed beyond anything its builders had ever intended. Energy cascade ready, Nemesis reported, firing. What emerged from the ship wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was pure creation, the opposite of the Devourers consuming darkness. A wave of life-giving energy swept outward from the nemesis, carrying with it the genetic patterns of every species that had ever lived in the galaxy. When the wave struck the Devourers, they began to change. Their dark hulls blazed with sudden light. Their feeding organs, designed to consume life, suddenly found themselves flooded with more life energy than they could process. One by one, the ancient enemy's ships began to transform. Jake watched in amazement as Devourer vessels burst open like flowers, releasing clouds of luminous gas that sparkled with newborn stars. The creatures that had fed on death for millions of years were experiencing life for the first time, and they couldn't contain it. The transformation spread through their entire fleet. Ships that had consumed galaxies suddenly became nurseries for new solar systems. The Devourers themselves, those ancient beings of pure hunger, found their consciousness expanded beyond the need to feed. They became something new, something that created instead of consumed. In less than an hour, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known had been transformed into its greatest gift. New stars blazed to life where Devourer ships had been. Planets began to form from the transformed matter of their hulls. The empty space at the galaxy's edge suddenly sparkled with the promise of new worlds and new life. My God, Lisa whispered, staring at the readings on her console. Jake, what did we do? We did what humans do, Jake replied, watching as the newborn stars settled into stable orbits. We found a way to win a war that couldn't be won. The communications array crackled with messages from across the fleet. Species that had fought each other for millennia were working together to catalog the new star systems. Scientists were already planning expeditions to study the transformed Devourers. Military leaders were discussing how to defend the new territories. But Jake's attention was focused on a message from the transformed Devourers themselves. They spoke through the cosmic background radiation, their voices carrying across space. Without the need for technology. We remember now, they said. We remember what we were before the hunger took us. We were builders once, creators of worlds and shapers of stars. The hunger made us forget, made us consume instead of create. You have given us back our true nature." Jake felt tears running down his face as he realized what had really happened. The Devourers hadn't been evil. They had been sick, infected by a cosmic plague that turned creators into consumers. The Builders hadn't just prepared humanity to fight their ancient enemies. They had prepared them to cure them. "The galaxy is safe," he said to his crew, "and it's going to be more beautiful than anyone ever imagined." As the Nemesis began its journey home to Earth, Jake looked out at the field of newborn stars and felt a deep satisfaction. 50,000 years ago, a dying civilization had gambled everything on the belief that somewhere in the universe